Okay, hello everybody. Should be able to find me somewhere on your screens, depending upon the view that you have right now. My name is David Kramer, as I said, and I am director of the library at the Jewish Theological Seminary. You can hear me, right? Shake heads if you can hear me. Okay, great. Welcome to the beginning of a new season of Between the Lines, which is our program of book talks dedicated to significant books of Jewish interest that we run through the academic year. We already have a fantastic season lined up. We're scheduled all the way till the beginning of February now, as I recall. And after today's session, I'll write to thank you and include a schedule of upcoming book talks so that you can sign up for those as well if you might be interested. We've been doing this for years, and it has always been my pleasure and my privilege, and I use those words a lot when I begin these programs, but I mean them. On this occasion, it is particularly not only my privilege, but my pleasure, because I have the opportunity, like you, to sit back, since I'm not the one who's going to be asking questions today. But I have occasion to sit back after my introductions and enjoy the conversation of two friends. And it's not always that the author and those who are engaged in conversation are friends, as these are for me. So it's a great personal pleasure and privilege to welcome Rabbi Ed Feld and Rabbi Jen Uhrbach to this evening's program. As you know, because you signed up, this is the name of the book is The Book of Revolutions, The Battles of Priests, Prophets, and Kings. And just to take a small part of the description, in a dramatic historical account grounded in recent biblical scholarship, Feld argues that the Torah is an emblem, of pluralistic belief born of revolutionary moments that preserve spiritual realities that continue to speak powerfully to us today. If you listen carefully to those words, you'll learn a lot, not just about the Torah, but about Rabbi Ed Feld. Rabbi Feld is senior editor of Machzor Lev Shalem and Sidur Lev Shalem for Sabbath and Festivals, books that many of you will know. He's currently at work on a weekday Sidur prayer book in this series. His other publications include Joy, Despair, and Hope, Reading Psalms, and The Spirit of Renewal, Finding Faith After the Holocaust. He has a long and spectacular career. In addition to having been a rabbi in residence at JTS, where we enjoyed his company for a long time, he was Hillel director and college chaplain at Princeton, University of Illinois, Smith, Amherst, and was rabbi spiritual leader at the Society for the Advancement of Judaism. My other friend participating in the program this evening is Rabbi Jen Uhrbach, who is the founding director of the Block Kolker Center for Spiritual Arts at JTS, a very important part of our programming, a real enhancement to our community. Through her work as director of the Block Kolker Center, she's developed and overseen programs and discussions, as well as prayer services on Sabbath and festivals for the JTS community and the general public. I have to add, this wasn't in the bio we included, but I think most people would agree that an outstanding part of her spiritual calendar is the Megillah reading and Purim spiel, which, if you've never attended, is incomparable. So are you doing that again this year, Jan?
Actually, this year I am on sabbatical in the spring.
Oh,
so
no.
I'm missing a year, but we'll be back next year.
Okay, so we're gonna have to postpone Purim this year. Anyhow, in addition to her roles at JTS, Jan serves as founding rabbi of the Conservative Synagogue of the Hamptons in Bridgehampton, Long Island, and has played a key role in Sidur Lev Shalem, that the Sidur series, as associate editor of Sidur Lev Shalem, which, as I mentioned before, is the Sabbath and Festival Sidur published by the Rabbinical Assembly in 2016. So I'm going to hand over to you guys, and I'm going to highlight you so you are the ones who are seen on the screen. At the end, we will reserve a few minutes for questions by those of you who have joined us. If you have any questions, please throw them into the chat, and I will pick them out and ask them when we get to the end of the conversation. Please be sure to keep your audio off. Stay on mute. If you stray from mute, I promise I will find you and mute you from afar. The program is being recorded, and we want to minimize any disruptions from the background. So I hope I've covered everything. We'll say more about how you can acquire the book at the end. But in the meantime, let us highlight or spotlight, I guess. Spotlight for everyone. That should lead us to Ed Feld. Here he is. And then I can add a spotlight, and next to him or above, depending upon your screen, is now Rabbi Jan Uhrbach. Welcome, folks, and please go right ahead.
Thank you so much. It's such a joy to be here and to be talking about this wonderful and in some really provocative and exciting book. Since we're here doing this for JTS, like I feel like I have to open with the beginning of your acknowledgments, in which you say, Ed, that the idea for the book came as a response to your students at JTS when you were with us as rabbi in residence. So what was it that you saw among these students or heard from them that led to the writing of this book?
So first of all, thank you, David, for your introduction and for organizing this evening. When I was when I was rabbi in residence at JTS, what struck me was that many students felt that once they studied Bible criticism, it destroyed their faith. That is to say that there are many different layers in Torah, there are many different authors, there are many different periods of it comes out of, destroyed their sense of, well, this is the Torah of Moses from Sinai, and therefore their essential belief collapsed. And I felt what needed to be done was to show that the different strands, the different layers, were each reaching for a spiritual reality, and I had uncovered spiritual truths that that went beyond their time, that speak to us today, to speak to Jews throughout the ages, and that biblical criticism doesn't have to destroy faith, but can in fact bring us to a different kind of faith, a faith which understands that there wasn't just one moment that said it all, but there are moments that uncovered truths which speak to us.
I mean, it speaks to me very personally, because I was, as a student, I don't think it destroyed my faith, but I had trouble finding meaning in it, in the critical study, and it often felt hostile to the text, sort of a desire to lay bare. And I think what I love so much about your book is that it's a very loving read of the text. Mm. Right? It's not looking at the layers in order to pick them apart hostilely, but to reveal the beautiful truths that were unfolding in each generation. Why? I mean, you note, I think that it's common when we look at the layers in the Torah to look at the narratives. You chose to focus very differently on law. I mean, in some ways, you flip the model. Usually what we do is we focus on the narrative in the Torah text, and we look at the texts that preceded it, but not the context. You looked at the context going on in in the world, and then focused on the law. Why that focus?
So a couple of things. One is that I started this while I was at JTS. And there's a sense of the centrality of law in Judaism, so that I wanted to speak to that. The other has to do with the Bible itself, which is that the law codes are quite distinct unit. There's a covenant code in Exodus. There is the book of Deuteronomy. There is the holiness code in the last part of Leviticus. They are quite distinct units. And unlike the narrative, where the final editors of the Torah tried to trace a single story from the beginning of creation through Abraham, through the slavery in Egypt, to the Exodus, to the march in the desert, to standing before coming into the land of Israel. They tried to create a single narrative, and that means that in many places we can't figure out what's one layer, what's another layer. Famously, Robert Alter, who's a wonderful biblical translator, said to try to tease out the different layers in the narrative is like trying to discover the elements of the omelet that were originally there. How do you recreate the egg? So the law codes actually provide a very distinct way of entering into the problem of biblical criticism, and it is quite possible to try to date these law codes, since they're very distinct and reflect a certain moment in time. So it actually created a way of talking about biblical criticism that was very helpful, I think.
And that's how you structured the book, is basically in 3 parts, right? With 3 specific revolutions. You want to just give us a little bit of each of what the 3 parts are?
Yeah. As I said, there is the covenant code in Exodus, and it is quite easy to note that this comes out of northern Israel. After Solomon died, the 10 tribes separated from Judea, and Benjamin eventually joined Judah. But the 10 tribes were the dominant power. They were 10 times the size of Judah. They had cities. Judah, I mean, the city of Jerusalem we assume, had about 8,000 people. It would be a modern village. But there were real cities and real development of culture in northern Israel. And so they developed a law code, and we can say that it's northern Israel in part because the calendar reflects northern Israel's time. That is, the new year is in the fall, and the North was a much more agricultural community, and so the time of harvest, the late harvest, the olive harvest, the grape harvest, those are the time of the new year. In in Judea, the new year was in the spring, and we have actually a quote in the Bible telling us that, right? At the beginning of Exodus, at the time of the Exodus itself, it says, "This will be for you this time of the Exodus," which is, as we celebrated in the spring. This time of the Exodus is Rosh Chodeshim. It is the first of the year. So we have 2 different moments, and we can really date and place where this code comes from. Deuteronomy comes out of the revolution of Josiah, in which there is a destruction of the pagan elements, and Deuteronomy is so strong about you must destroy the Asherot, you must destroy the pagan idols, you must destroy their altars, and that almost really violent language in Deuteronomy reflects the violence of the Josianic Revolution. And then the third is the Holiness Code. And the Holiness Code is a code written primarily in exile. And I say that because so much of what is central to the Holiness Code can't be implemented. I mean, the Holiness Code mentions no, unlike Deuteronomy, which says you should appoint judges in every city and so forth, right? You should appoint judges, you should have magistrates. The Holiness Code, there's no, God will punish you.
Right.
Yeah. It's a time when there isn't real government. You're in exile. And it has this vision, ultimately, that every 50 years, the land will be returned to, quote, its original owners. There will never, you can never have permanent poverty, because there will be, every 50 years, you will be restored to your original condition. There was never a time that this was implemented in all of Jewish history. Certainly not in the First Temple. Nobody ever dates their moment as being the 25th year towards the Jubilee or something. So it is an imagined moment. And the imagined moment is the imagined moment of exile, where we can imagine a return, and we're going to do this right this time. We're going to have a system of social equity.
So is there any, what if anything surprised you as you researched and wrote this book?
So one of the things that surprised me, and that I think I learned in the writing, was that each of these moments, each of these revolutions, were influenced by prophetic thinking. Mm-hmm. We normally think of prophets as being outsiders, right? Prophets are opposed to the institutions. They're screaming from the outside, this is what you should.
Right.
Well, these codes attempt to implement prophetic thinking. That is, and you know, I talk in the book of the way in which the covenant code comes out of the experience of Elijah and Elisha, mm-hmm. right? In which they opposed Ahab and Jezebel. And they opposed Ahab and Jezebel on two grounds. One, that Jezebel had brought the Phoenician gods or goddesses into the pantheon, right? And two, that they were immoral. They corrupted the judiciary. They corrupted and the Book of Kings tells a story, right, of how Jezebel initiated a process by which they could grab hold of land next to the palace that was owned by Naboth, and she arranged for the court to try him and kill him, and then because he was tried as a treasonous person, therefore the land goes to the king, and they got the land. Now, whether this incident occurred or didn't occur, or, you know, what it teaches us is that Elijah and Elisha had two fundamental issues. One was opposing the Baal, right, the priests of Baal, famously on Mount Carmel, and two, opposing the corruption that had taken place. The covenant code reflects these themes. Its great issues are the single worship of Adonai, and also the ethical behavior that you need to practice. in a similar way, Deuteronomy is validated by a prophetess, Huldah, right? Because it too has this prophetic message. Over and over again, Deuteronomy talks about taking care of the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, right? And that impulse that the social life has to include and give dignity to every person, and there cannot be an underclass that's deserted, if you will, that's left without care. Those are the strength of the sort of belief in Adonai, and that the center of Adonai is an ethical life. That our notion of divinity is different than what the nations of the world have in the language of Deuteronomy, because they have gods who war with each other. They have they have gods who behave immorally. But we have a God whose essence is divine, defined by the care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan, and so and similarly, the holiness code gives us an ideal that we could never implement, right? The holiness code gives us this ideal that we should love our neighbor as ourselves, and Heschel remarked that it's the one command you certainly cannot fulfill, right? But it's an ideal that we need to treat the other as we want to be treated, you know, and we have to see everyone we meet as a full person, and that in the holiness code, that represents the imitation of God. Mm-hmm. That be holy because God is holy. Do this because that's the way God behaves.
So, so I'm very struck because I know, in your years at Princeton Hillel, and I know this from colleagues who were there and became rabbis because of you, and I know firsthand from, when you were at JTS as rabbi in residence, your usual role in those contexts. I mean, you're the beloved spiritual guide, right? You're the you've been the advisor to so many students studying to be rabbis and cantors, and then rabbis and cantors over the years who continue to consult and meet with you. And certainly at JTS for those years, you were the address to talk about God and the soul and faith and doubt, right? So I'm going to get a little personal. I'm going to push you a little bit. So now you spent all this time in this, in this biblical critical mode, uncovering the layers of the human hand and the way that the context and the politics and all of it influenced the Torah text, and you did that in part to help students find faith in the Torah and not have it undermine their faith. Where's God in this book for you and in this scholarship? Like, how do you square what you uncover historically and your own faith commitments?
So you press me in a way that is very thoughtful. My sense of God's presence emerges in moments, right? I don't have a sense of God who accompanies me. I do have a sense of, if you will, God being revealed in God being revealed in certain in certain meetings with people, God being revealed. For me, in my morning davening, looking out at the trees and the grass and frequently birds. Now that we're in summer, the birds flying by, the songs they sing to each other. There, it is from those moments that God arises. And what I found in these historical moments is that there are certain moments in which an understanding of God arises.
Mm-hmm.
And that always religion is not abstract, but religion is embedded. It's embedded in a life and related to a life and related to a time. And what one had to say, or in a specific moment in time, arose about God, arose out of the context of that time.
I mean, it's so consistent with the teacher I know and love, and I think it's why so many rabbis and cantors and students come to you, because I think you're very consistent about your commitment to the focus on how a human being lives in relationship with God, rather than the abstract notions of some conceptual
Right.
thing out there that is disconnected from us. And I think that compassion that you have for the human condition, attempting to live in the presence of God, really comes through the pages of the book. There's an empathy, I think, that you feel for the people living through tumultuous times and trying to find God in them, right, and to discern what God demands. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, there's one piece of the book in particular that has such resonance as we're anticipating Rosh Hashanah, and the Seder Malchuyot, right, and crowning God as sovereign. And you write in the book about how it was that God came to be referred to as Melech, as king, which we're so used to because it's a required part of every bracha, right? You have to refer to God as sovereign. But as you lay out in the book, that wasn't always the case. It wasn't an inevitable, natural way of thinking about God.
So what's very interesting is that in the Torah itself, God is never referred to as king. Except for, there are two exceptions. Both of them are in poems, right? In Moses' Song of the Sea, Adonai Yimloch L'olam Va'ed, God is referred to as king, and similarly in Moses' song at the end of Deuteronomy, God is referred to as king. Otherwise, this actually, thinking of now of Rosh Hashanah, this actually was a great problem for the rabbis, because for the Malchut section of the blowing of the shofar, you in Musaf, you have to have 3 verses from the Torah for every thought, right? For Malchut, Zichronot, and Shofrot, for God's kingship, for the remembrances, and for the shofar. You can find those verses for the other 2, but since there are only 2 verses which refer to God as king in the Torah, they had a hard time, and so they ended up saying Shema Yisrael. But in Psalms, we have lots of Psalms which refer to God as king. I think that the final editors of the Torah, which were the priests who did the Holiness Code, um, didn't like kings. Uh, they felt that the kings of Israel and Judah had led to the destruction, and who needs kings? You know, and at this moment, with a new king in England, one might well ask, you know, do we really want a king? Some people in England, at least, are asking that, a minority. But the notion of kingship, as it played out, was a notion that the kings of the world are subject to the king in heaven. That to assert God's sovereignty was a way of saying nothing else has ultimate power, nothing else has ultimate value. To assert God's sovereignty is, when we say God is king, we say that's the ultimate authority. And so and in that section of the book, I quote this, what I think is this beautiful piyut from Rosh Hashanah, right, which talks about the king in heaven cares for us, loves us, we are the people, and the king on earth gets drunk and falls asleep at night, and right. So it's this comparison of earthly power as ultimately earthly power as ultimately subject to heavenly power. That's what it means to say God is sovereign.
Right. And that, I mean, it's very striking to think about that emerging from that image of God as sovereign, and that expression of it emerging from the people's experiences with kings and with and with struggles between kings, and and that and just and sort of exporting that experience into the theological realm. Um, I want to come back to the question of law, and your choice here to focus specifically on law, because I think that it's in some ways easier in the realm of Agadah, in the realm of sort of spiritual teaching and moral lessons, and if we see the human hand in the text, we can still feel the divine inspiration. But when it comes to law, it can be a little bit more difficult, and so, and you trace the way that the three different law codes that you've identified sometimes deal with material differently, and so if a person is committed to halakha, what does that mean to you in terms of your own halakha and and the way you understand halakha and your own religious commitments from a legal perspective?
So one thing is that the Torah, this is the remarkable fact of the editors, right, of the Torah, if you will, the spiritually inspired editors. The rabbis always thought Ezra was a kind of prophet for being a new Moses, if you will, and putting together all these different law codes in one book meant that the people who put it together were willing to live with a world in which there was not a single-minded way of behaving. There wasn't a one right way of behaving. That there were many truths that had been discovered. And the truths are like a rainbow. The truth isn't just a white light. The truth is a rainbow. The truth that in the words of the rabbis, Shivim Panim La Torah, there are 70 faces to the Torah. What these different codes allow are different ways to understand who we are, different ways to understand what God wants from us. And I write at the end of the book, there are times that I sympathize with one, sometimes I sympathize with the other, sometimes. What I think did happen Jewishly is that there was an attempt to make law practical, to deal with the everyday, to deal with just the most mundane matters, right? If you will, brachot for when you go to the bathroom, dealing with the most mundane matters, and a sense of an ideal that could never be realized.
Mm-hmm.
That is, law has, and that was the gift of for Exodus to begin with, right? Is that these are the laws you have to follow, and the holiness code that it ends with, which is be holy because God is holy, love your neighbor as yourself. This kind of striving to be beyond oneself, to striving so that if you will, the greatness of Jewish law is that it isn't just one, doesn't have just one impulse, it has these variety of impulses which impel it. I do believe that the message I hope some people take away is the value of pluralism, which is the way I end the book. I think that diversity, pluralism is an important way that we should think about our reality. I always say American Judaism is rich because we have Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist. I identify with one of those streams, but that I appreciate the fact that we have all of these streams. And if one of these streams should not be here, we would be poorer. And that's the message of diversity and the message of pluralism. We're rich because of these different approaches.
And you're making the case in the book that's actually built into the Torah itself, right? That that's the intention. I sometimes like to say that the Torah is fundamentally an anti-fundamentalist text, right? Like it's not meant to be read in a univalent fundamentalist way, and that's not easy. It's not easy for people who are attracted to faith commitments to live with that ambiguity and that pluralism. And I'm very aware that it's characteristic of the conservative movement, right? That we hold multiple opinions and we understand that law evolves, and that there can be simultaneously more than one right opinion, and we get criticized for that a lot, right? And what you're saying is that didn't emerge only from the oral Torah, from the rabbinic tradition, and you're saying that's actually built into the Torah itself, and it's a feature, not a bug, right? That's
yeah. And we're here with David Kramer, who has brought us together, and David has written about how Talmudic Judaism is really a Judaism which did not produce a single code, but rather produced a discussion and a way to engage in discussion. And it's much more interesting, it seems to me, to talk about Judaism as a conversation,
right,
than to talk about Judaism as a single-minded way of life.
Right. So I have to. It's almost impossible not to connect the title of the book. This is just so everybody can see it. The Book of Revolutions, um, the battles of priests, prophets, and kings that birthed the Torah. But you know, the focus of the book on revolutions, on times of upheaval and dislocation, and paradigm shifts, and battles for power and cultural control with the moment that we're in. And you know, I found that reading the book helped me in this moment. It helped me to, in a number of ways, one, to contextualize the present moment as part of the natural cycle of history. That this is, you know, it's not only what we're experiencing is not only you know, sort of repeats of terrible moments, but also of very productive generative moments that might not have been easy to live through, but that were really sort of essential to the development of Judaism as we know it, and that regimes and nations rising and falling and seemingly solid, stable institutions and cultures giving way is, that's where we come from. That's our roots. Um, did you find that working on this book helped you personally navigate some of the anxiety of the time that we're living in? And are there lessons for how we might face a challenging time like this that you want to share with us that came to you as you were working?
Well, I think what you said is very important. That is to say, to enter into Jewish history is to give us perspective. Right? We've seen empires come and go. We've seen our own corruption and our own attempt to overcome our corruption. We've seen moments of that are spiritual deserts and moments that are spiritual revivals. I think that yeah, that to enter into Jewish history is in and of itself, if you will, a helpful way of dealing with our times. These times too shall pass, you know, and new teachings will emerge, and important new teachings, and you know, as you know, Mordechai says to Esther, you know, if you don't do it, you know, there'll be salvation that will come to us, you know, not from the most expected places necessarily. The other piece is that each of these revolutions made the claim that they were deeply rooted in tradition. Mm-hmm. That to do, I mean, you know, we think of the word revolution as meaning the new. Well, it more to the point about these revolutions is that it is a kind of clarification of the tradition, of saying, oh, this is what is the most important element, and this is what is critical that I want to bring into our time. So what it teaches me is both to place myself within the tradition, but not to become a simple servant of the tradition, but to become someone who asks about the tradition, what can be carried forward, mm-hmm. what works, what speaks in our time, that's the revolution.
It's almost, what you're describing is almost the opposite of the the rabbinic notion of Yeridat HaDorot, right? Of that we get further away from Sinai, we get less authentic, we're less true. Right. This is what you're describing is a vision of Judaism in which, from the very beginning, it was understood that there is a Torah for each time, that
Right.
each generation
Yes.
has an aspect of the divine will to reveal that will be revealed in the context and language and metaphors of that time. And that's not inauthentic. That's what keeps it vibrant and relevant and more authentic, actually.
Um, what you're saying is just so beautiful, and I quote in the book, and in this context at JTS, it makes sense to quote as well Gershon Cohen, who was my teacher at JTS, and who wrote this lovely essay on the positive effects of Jewish assimilation, right? That and points most especially to the moment in Spain where we lived alongside a Muslim culture in which we borrowed poetry and philosophy and Ibn Gabriel Halevi, Ibn Ezra. They're all a result of having immersed themselves in that culture and brought forth from that culture something which was Jewishly live and can continue to speak to us. It's how do we live within the culture and make it Jewish, and make it a moment of revelation for us.
Right. So I haven't been watching the chat, but I'm aware there's a lot of comments there, and I know we wanted to leave about 10 minutes for questions. I guess where I want to, I mean, other than saying, that the book is published by the Jewish Publication Society and it can be purchased there. It's also available on Amazon and on Kindle. I guess where I want to end with you is with gratitude to the students who had such crises of faith that you heard so deeply that you felt moved to respond to them. It's such a wonderful example of that notion that the questions of the students sharpen the teacher.
Yeah.
And we're all the beneficiaries of their anxieties about what the critical study of Bible could mean for faith. And I really will say, as someone who, as a student at JTS, I never fully got it, why the critical study of Bible was so important and how it could yield this much meaning. And I understand it so much better now, having read your book, and in part because you are such a compassionate, empathic, loving storyteller, that we feel the context in which these laws and the theologies and the way of experiencing and responding to God were being debated and struggled with and sharpened, and like we feel what they were responding to. And it, for me at least, it gives me a lot of chizuk, a lot of courage in thinking about, well, what do we need in this moment? So David, are there
questions? There are some questions. I'm going to leave both of you guys on screen, and I'll be in the background, but you can hear my voice, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let me begin this one, Ed. I'm sure you'll really connect to. Dorothy, who is a physician, asks, in this approach and the focus on the biblical text, what inspires awe, right? Where does awe come from? And she explains that question by saying that what inspired awe in her life experience was actually the study of anatomy, to look at the beautiful structure of the human or presumably other bodies and appreciate that as the intervention of the divine, inspiring awe. someone added that another doctor friend of theirs said just by looking at the hand, right, and the complexity and beauty of the human hand, that was the source of inspiration or awe. So where does awe come from for you in examining the biblical text this way?
I think for me, there are moments when a line of Torah just stands out. You come across this amazing line, this amazing thought, this amazing, and you know, I stand there and I think, how could this idea be 3,000 years old? You know, how could this idea have come to the fore? How could somebody have phrased it so well? How could somebody have thought this thought, which was to put it in terms which I usually don't like, so advanced, that is to say, that is so much that it can continue to speak to us. I'm in awe of language, of text that can transcend time.
Okay, so since you're looking to the post-biblical age, we've got an appropriate question. One of our participants wants to know what moments in post-biblical history you see as being most closely parallel to the biblical revolutions that you identify, and are there any ways that you see Jewish experience in the 20th century, 21st century today as echoing the revolutions of the past, of the biblical past, again, that you speak of in your book?
So in terms of the Jewish past, for me, I would point to two moments. I mean, one is the moment after the destruction of the temple, and this is your sphere, David, you know, where there was this incredible crisis of the destruction of the temple and how we're going to reconstruct Jewish life. And the kind of genius that emerged in the generations, which produced ultimately the Mishnah and the Tannaitic texts, and eventually the Talmud, both in Babylonian and in the land of Israel. What emerged was, and what's interesting is that it took a very long time. And as I say, often, all Jewish great texts have many authors, just like the Torah had many authors. It's, you know, the fact that Mishnah and Talmud have these multiple authors with different opinions and most frequently in the Talmud unresolved disagreements. That's an enormous, a great moment in Jewish history to which we're all indebted. And the other moment I would point to is Spain in its golden age. You know, the absolutely beautiful poetry that we have from that era, and the major philosophic texts, the text, Maimonides' approach to Jewish life versus Halevi's approach to Jewish life, you know, and the kind of debate between Halevi and Maimonides. And this is for me great. These two are enormously great moments of Jewish history. Martin Buber had a different approach. He said there were only two great moments of Jewish history: the moment of the Bible and the moment of Hasidism. Yeah. He said about Hasidism, there's never been a time like this in world history in which there were so many great spiritual leaders in such a short space of time.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that a historian is not a prophet. Prophets can tell you about their time. I did a work of history, and I can't, I've chosen a certain path, and I can tell you about my path. Is my path the path, or even a path, that will ultimately succeed, ultimately be remembered? I don't know. I mean, I've said something about that path. The path is a path of pluralism. When I'm, one of my roles has been as senior editor of the Lev Shalem prayer book series. And what I am so proud of in that, as people read the comments on the side, is that you can read in the same book the poetry of Amichai, who is writing as a secularist, and the writings of the Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and that they both exist in the same book, and they both have something to teach us. And that attitude, which says there's just a range of human possibility, and it is in recognizing the fullness of the spiritual gifts of this range that we can live with the fullness of our own being.
Beautiful. Thank you. Won't press you on your prophecy. You said you don't know whether your way will survive. Well, I'd like to believe that important books will have many afterlives, will be read for many years to come, and I certainly hope that will be true of your book as well. So, these days people know how to get books, but you may have a preferred way that you want to recommend. So how should people find your book and read it?
So here is the lovely cover of the book. It is published by the Jewish Publication Society, and you can easily find order forms on the website of the Jewish Publication Society. You can also, as Jan mentioned, go to Amazon and buy either the print edition or the Kindle edition. I do want to say one more thing before we close, which is people have put into the chat some memories of times of being together, and I'm so appreciative of so many friends and former students who are on this call, and it's just want to be with you.
Well, it's a tribute to you that everybody wants to be here. So Jan, thank you so much for your wonderful engagement with the author.
Thank you.
Ed, thank you so much for your thoughtful and inspiring comments and for the book. And all of you who have been with us, thank you for joining us. I want to wish you, on behalf of the Library of JTS, a Shana Tova, a good, wonderful, healthy year, in just blessed in every possible way. And we hope that you will join us again for future discussions, book, author presentations, and other library programs. So we've got a rich season planned, and we are confident that you will enjoy it when you come back. So Shana Tova to everybody.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Thank you, David, and thank you, Jan.
Thank you.